Welcome to our March Buzz Pick of the Month author event. We're thrilled to have Anne Lamott and her editor, Jake Morrissey, here to talk about Anne's latest book, Dusk, Dawn, on revival and courage. Anne is the best-selling author of 19 beloved books, including Operating Instructions, Small Victories, Bird by Bird, Help, Thanks, Wow, and many more. Jake is an executive editor of Riverhead Books, where he edits both fiction and nonfiction, including books by Daniel H. Pink, James McBride, Marlon James, and others. Dusk Dawn is the ninth book that Anne and Jake have worked on together, and it's on sale now and available at your local independent bookstore. If you don't have one of those yet, visit indiebound.org to find an indie in your area. Throughout the conversation today, feel free to use the Q&A box to send in a question. We'll have a Q&A portion towards the end with some of the questions here and those submitted at your registration. Closed caption is also available at the bottom of your screen. On behalf of Indie Book Buzz and Bookfinity, thank you so much for joining us today, and remember to follow Indie Book Buzz on Instagram and visit bookfinity.com for the latest BuzzPick news. And now we're pleased to virtually welcome Jake Morrissey and Anne Lamott.
How are you, Anne Lamott?
Hi, Jay. God, I can't believe between the two of us we're getting this to work. It's a miracle. Hi, I'm good.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to sort of see you and talk about a book that we have been working on for what, 2 years? Is it that long?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I was one of the things I was thinking about before we got together here is how to remind or tell people how you approach writing a book about renewal and courage at a time when the world looked so bleak. What was in you that made you able to write this book?
Well, as you remember firsthand, 2.5 years ago, I was doing a book tour at such a time when we still did that crazy thing. And I went around the country to share my book on hope, which was called Almost Everything, because your boss and my publisher, Jeff Klosky, thought that Doomed, a book on hope or thoughts on hope, would not sell well. Remember, you and I were in a restaurant in New York with our spouses when we thought of that title. But so anyway, it ended up being called Almost Everything, Thoughts on Hope. And everywhere I went in the country, people did not feel hopeful. People felt scared and defeated and kind of stunned by it all, by the political reality, by the environmental catastrophe, and this is before COVID, and so I thought, well, I'll sit down and tell people stories of where, in so much crisis and so many fearful events, we start to get our courage and our confidence in life back. The rest is history. Then you and I, yeah.
Well, what else changed in your life?
Well, oh yeah, that that silly thing. I got married 2 years ago. You were there. And I got married 2 years ago, took the vows, but didn't know that they would include being in quarantine together for a year.
And they say romance is dead, ladies and gentlemen. But I remember actually having this conversation, and it was tricky because you would call and be enraged by what was happening. And yet you sat down and wrote a book on how to renew and be courageous. What did you draw from?
Well, I drew from what has always worked before, which is that you start where you are. I mean, the same information I would give to a writing conference. You start where you are. You decide to have a little breakthrough and get back either to work or back to your life, the stuff that you still love about your life. So some things were still available all through the last 4 years and then COVID. And so I started telling stories and memories and theories I had about how this was really, I always have said that Earth is forgiveness school. And I felt that the last 4 years, and then especially COVID. I mean, COVID was COVID college, and so that's in the book too.
Right.
And we got to discover what works and what you shouldn't even bother with, and how much grace there is in being denied your old stuck patterns and habits. Although, don't get me wrong, I love all my old stuck habits and patterns, but you had to create a new ordinary life because you couldn't go anywhere. And I say hooray for ordinary life.
Well, um, how does this book surprise you when you finished it? What surprised you most about it?
Um, well, I'll tell you one thing. You always struggled editing that chapter where I'm at the storytelling guild, and people are supposed to read 10-minute stories, and they're reading 15 and 20 minutes, and then there's a 20-minute intermission, and I had a complete nervous breakdown. I don't know what it was. I don't have panic attacks, but it felt like a full-fledged panic attack. And you were always sort of anxious that it should be funnier, or it's called Can You Love Me Now, based on decompensating in front of my nice new husband. And then, like that old telephone commercial, Can You Love Me Now? You can see how petty I am now, and how can you love me now? And now you can see what a jerk I can be, and how hysterical can you love me now? So, but you always, I thought, um, it was that there were other stories that I know you completely loved and hardly recommended me changing a word. But that has been the story on almost every book event I've done, and every podcast. People have said that's the one where they laugh hardest. And so it's funny, but it's also because you're not supposed to talk about having melting down in public when you're at a perfectly lovely, benevolent event. And I think people were so relieved that somebody finally told what it's like for them when most poetry readings, there I've said it, you know, many religious, special religious events. Oh my God, if any of you have ever been to the school orchestra, the school recitals, you just feel like you've taken something that's not agreeing with you, and that you have to go to the emergency room. And so I wrote about that, but that surprised me, actually, how much people um, love that story. What surprised me is that it's more trippy and mystical than my other books. I mean, all my books to some extent are on hope and faith, and becoming fully human when every single thing that ever happened to you as a child told you not to become fully human, because that was not convenient, and also it didn't further your grades, and it didn't make your family look good. In fact, just the opposite. So, well, all of my books have been about that at some point. Um, I felt like this book, when I've been reading it over for book events, it's a little trippier. It's more mystical, and there's a kind of meta spirituality to it that actually did surprise me, because I definitely do not have any interesting theological positions on. But I think it was partly the catastrophe of the UN climate change reports, which is on the first page, that was sort of one incentive to write a book on renewal and courage in the face of that. And then definitely COVID, which was happening when I was finishing it up, and when you and I still had several months of work to do on it. And I think that because I couldn't do so much of what I'm used to doing, and like have stories that took place in interesting locations or exotic ports, I was paying very close attention to what did work, and to what was all around me, and that was across the street 6 feet away in a mask. And so there's a lot about compassion. There's a lot about attention. There's a lot, because every day was, well, for me, I'm sure every day was just a completely wild and crazy experience for you and Jean. But for me, every day was kind of the same, because you didn't have that many choices. And so, in that every day, you needed to find a new ordinary. But in the new ordinary, you really better get your curiosity back, or you were doomed. And so, somehow, I got my curiosity back. And I think that really comes through in the book.
I think you're right. And what interests me when you're talking about the smaller focus of the book, um, how much time do you think it took you to sort of get your ideas in your head before you sat down, or did you sit down and work through your ideas as you wrote?
Well, when you and I had dinner that night in New York, all four of us were talking about just what a catastrophe life what had been for 2 years and was almost certainly going to be for 2 more years, and environmental tragedies were speeding up. There was more every day, and we were all talking about the effect of that on us and on our very bitter grown children, how they blamed us. And so we had started talking that night about where do you find hope, and just asking each other what still really makes you happy, what still gives you faith that we're going to come through this, that life really does support us, all evidence to the contrary. And that was the night I started. And I remember right where we were when we were the four of us walking outside, and it was kind of drizzly, and I said, I want to call my book Doomed, and you said Doomed, Thoughts on Hope, or else it was the other way around, but we
No, you're
came up
right.
with it. And I thought it was so funny and paradoxical, and then of course we couldn't get Jeff to go along with it. But so it was really over that conversation, because I had done, I guess I was maybe at Barnes and Noble that night. I no longer remember. But anyway, I had done a reading in an evening event somewhere, and that was the question every single person in the audience wanted to know. We are scared to death. I am scared to death by the glacial melting. I'm scared to death at the dining room table every night. I have a kid who I think is out of control. Where do you start? Well, you start where you are. You do what's possible. You don't do what would be the ideal and perfect response to try out in a world where things really went the way you wanted and God had a magic wand. You start with what is, and you see a few things that you might be able to either do or stop doing. And for instance, a few months ago, was it 3 months ago, the cold snap in Texas, where all of a sudden Texas was frozen, and old people were dying and poor people were dying, which is always the case in America, and it certainly was 3 months ago, maybe less so now. But it was just terrible what was happening. And the food lines, and people just trying to get some food and some water that wasn't frozen. But what you saw was what Mr. Rogers' mother always said, which was to look to the helpers. And you saw a really global response of compassion and giving and caring, and people sent money to the food banks. They sent in Texas, and they sent money to the Red Cross. You don't stop in a tragedy and try to figure out your position on Red Cross's internal workings or who's on the board. You just know that if you send money to Red Cross, they'll get people food and blankets and water. And so that was like so oh, inspiring to me once again. But again, the whole book is stories like that are the same old stories since I've been alive. That life can be very messy and awful sometimes, and people show up. They show up however they can with whatever they can, and they help. So, yeah.
So how do you find the points that you want to draw our attention to? In other words, this is a writing question more than it is an idea question. Where do you point the light? How do you decide that?
Well, that is a great question. I think, and I know you as a writer have experienced this, that sometimes it feels that the material sort of knows what it's about, and it would love for you to get out of the way with all of your anxious thoughts full of self-doubt and extreme tedium. And so what I have to do is just sit down and keep my butt on the chair. And these stories started emerging. Like the first story the prologue takes place during a day in my early marriage, where my flight in San Diego, after a big lecture in a huge tent, my flight's canceled. But luckily, I'm a very evolved spiritual person, so it doesn't bother me the first time. And the second time, I decided, well, I'll just get a manicure while I'm waiting, because it was going to be 3 hours. And then the shop had closed early, and I started to attack the manicurist who decided to close early. And I watched myself just thanking God that my son wasn't there to see this, because the color would have drained from his face. And then when that closed down, then I did the only thing that was left to me, which was I got a 2-pound sack of York peppermint patties, miniature York peppermint patties, and I ate 20, 25 of them. And I was kind of just at my wit's end. And so that's the first story in the first chapter. Where do we start? Well, you pick up the 200-pound phone and you call someone and you say, I hate everything, all of life, and I should never have gotten married, and Neil did not respond properly to my cry for help. And then you do what's possible. You get a room for the night and you pay attention. What's going on here that does not support your story of anguish and doom? Well, there's this, as you know, as you edited, this funny little girl with this ribbon that she played with for 3 hours, and again the next morning when we all met up to get on our flight. You look for brighter ribbons. You look around. You stop staring at the ground. You look up. Like that great story my pastor told, that you can trap bees in a mason jar on the ground with no lid on because they don't look up. All they have to do is look up and they can fly away. So that's a story about kind of looking up, looking into the past, looking to the time in Florida that you'll remember, where I was newly sober and kind of falling apart and scared. And at midnight, an elderly Texas woman with a very high bouffant and a pink Cadillac came to my hotel room. I didn't know her from Adam's house cat, nor did she know me. And we talked for 2 hours, and I was better. So that tends to be some kind of point for me that I started writing these stories towards. That things seem, and often are, life is really hard sometimes. But the point of the book is that we're good at hard. It's just like Sam, my son, has a tattoo on his forearm that says, "We never give up." And so a lot of these stories are about how, in the face of how incredibly bizarre and excruciating the last 4 years have been, do we not give up? And well, what if we march? What if we today, if everybody listening sends $10 to a food pantry? All through the COVID, we saw these lines of 3 and 4 miles long of parents waiting for hours to try to get a box of food for their kids. If you don't have $10, can you send 3? Mm-hmm. If you have 30, can you send that? And you do one. It's again that great line of Mother Teresa's, that we can't do great things. No one can do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. What would that look like to do? What could you do? You can go through your pantry and take all the canned goods and drive them over to the food pantry in the area of our county where all the service people work, where the rate of COVID is astronomical. But you don't do nothing.
I am by no means a brilliant parent, but the two pieces of advice I gave my daughters over the course of their lives were pay attention and make an effort. Mm-hmm. And that's mm-hmm. kind of what you're talking about here, is understanding that there are things you can do to help other people and also yourself. And that, I think, that I think goes to what I'm interested in the book, which is the renewal. The idea that you can come back and be better.
Yeah. And you almost certainly will be, always, before you have been. But when I first got sober, somebody said to me, because I was raised by intellectuals and we worshiped intellectual prowess and the great New York City male intelligentsia. And so I was raised to break codes and then to know what to do next. And someone said to me, you take the action and the insight will follow. But take the action, like figure it out is not a good mantra. See, what's the action you can do? I think your slogans for your kids are great, like figure it out and give it a shot, but not figure it out, give it a shot. And what was the other one?
Pay attention and make an effort.
Pay attention, make an effort. I heard someone who I really love and trust say the other day, when I was in a bit of a Swivet, they said, assume good intentions. And I thought, are you crazy?
Have you taken leave of
Are
your
you
senses?
mad? Yeah. But then, I wrote it on a post-it because I do think people mostly have good intentions. But I take them, I have a little paranoia, hardly worth mentioning. And when I feel, stressed out or traumatized, I try to figure out who to blame. That's what we always did in my family. It worked then. And instead of assuming that it's someone out there that's making me crazy, maybe I got to go look in the mirror and understand that I'm in judgment and blame and I've got my arms crossed. And that's not a very receptive place to be. But I love those 3 words, assume good intentions. And I've been laughing about it for the last few weeks because whenever I do it, things sort of get better again.
Well, that goes back to the courage to look at what you thought you know in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, talk about your writing life. I know you're amazing at discipline, but talk about your writing day? What do you do? How do you get up in the morning, and what do you do?
Well, as you know, I've been very honest about the fact that I don't write before and after publication because I'm too traumatized. But um, the rest of the year, I kind of semi sort of often know what I'm going to do next. And the bad voices inside of me tell me that's not enough. My husband Neil, who he has a book. I'll just mention it. It's called Shapes of Truth. He just got a big box from Ingram. They're distributing for him. He got a big box, shapesofTruth.com. And he talks a lot about the superego and how that gets in the way of everything. That might be an inspiration or a good idea and I call it in my book the governess. And dread was my governess growing up. And it said, don't try that. You don't know what you're doing. Don't go out into the street. You shouldn't swim beyond your ability to stay afloat. And it was very valuable at 7 years old. But as Neil writes in his book, and as I've taken as my own, it doesn't really serve you at 67. I'm very careful about traffic. I'm very careful about not swimming alone. And but now I still have this internalized voice that says, um, I really need to know what I'm doing, and I really then need to execute it perfectly because I was raised to be a perfectionist. So what I've always done with my writing students was to have them put a 1-inch picture frame on their desk and to only write that day whatever they could see through the 1-inch picture frame. Maybe it's a passage, maybe it's a transition on page 37 to 39 that you've kind of scribbled in, but that maybe you have an idea, but it's only 1 inch. You only have to see the 1 inch. Maybe it's a memory you really want to capture. It comes out, I'm sure you do this, it comes out 4.5 pages, and probably it's about a long paragraph's worth of interest to anybody else. But you got your work done. You just saw this one memory or a vision or a passage or an ending, transition through the 1-inch picture, and so you just do it. And I do that every day. My dad was a writer, and he taught me that you don't wait for inspiration. You don't and you don't figure it out. You're not going to figure it out by doing it, by doing the writing. And so I just sit down at the same time every morning, and then I usually do. I can do 2 hours without extreme discomfort. Um, by just starting where I left off, or starting what I can see through the picture frame, or starting what would be the organic and natural next thing that would happen in the work. And and I scribble notes to myself all the time, and I bring the notes that have to do with the current chapter I'm on, and so there I have a little bit of help to go on. And then after 2 hours, I have to say, I start to really lose my focus and any interest I may have had in being a writer when I grow up. So then I resort to bribes and threats. And then I start saying, if you write this next piece that takes place at the beach in Inverness when you were little and your Uncle Don was still alive. We can stop for 15 minutes and we'll watch MSNBC. And so then I'll do it, and then I'll say, okay, then we'll sit back down. And I just like a kid, like kind of, I don't want to be here. And I'll say, if you write for 45 more minutes, we'll stop and I'll make you a grilled cheese sandwich. And then all of a sudden, I've gotten 3 or 4 hours of work done, and I'm going to feel completely different for the rest of the day. And I may, for the rest of the afternoon, walk around and have some decent ideas about what comes next.
Now, when that's the writing process. When you
Right.
when you go through the editing process with a chucklehead like, oh, I don't know, me, how do
Yeah.
how does that evolve? Are you in a different headspace when you have something on the page?
Yeah, I'm in a lot of, paradoxically, I'm in uh, great relief that it's not all blank pages anymore, that unassaulted ice flow. And I'm in dread that because I haven't heard from you yet, and I don't know if it's even readable. And if you're going to come through, or if I have to get a new editor, one with a shred of human decency. And so I usually do that. And then you call and you say, I love it. I've got some ideas. I love it. I love this about it. I love that. This is a great story. I've never heard you tell that one before. This one, I'm wondering if you're coming at it from the wrong direction. To me, what makes it interesting is and then we have those talks, but mostly I'm being flooded, like having a full body flush of relief that you sort of like it, or that you said you loved it, and that you're in, and that you're not going to get rid of me, and I don't have to get rid of you. So really, that's about 80% for me of the battle. And then what happens is I talk to like all of my spiritual mentors and best girlfriends and Neil, and they all say, why don't you give poor old Jake a couple of weeks to have a go at it and not bug him and not turn on him? And so then I'll say to you, when do you think you'll be, how much time do you think you need? And then you usually say, let me get back to you in a couple of weeks. So then you really do. And that's why we've done 9 books together, is because I say what I mean, and you say what you mean, and you do what you've said. And we're both such perfectionists, and we're both such worker bees. It's kind of pathetic, really. But I mean, I'm such a worker bee. If you've said, could you try this passage again? I'll send it to you by the next morning. I just do it that way, and you do it that way too.
Yes.
So we have this great rapport and kind of contempt for everybody else that takes so long to get back to us. So then, then usually what happens is I've gotten a long editorial letter from you, and it's just so incredible because it's very thoughtful, and it's clearly a second draft. And what you do is to go through it and say what you love, say the stuff that you don't think is working yet, and then of course my feelings are really hurt, and then I overeat, and that's your fault. And then I wonder, since you've done this for me 8 times before and now 9 times, maybe you're right. Maybe you have. I consider you a full collaborator, and I've said that in many different rooms
You have.
and to many different people. So that I have, and I consider that so to be true. Then there'll be chapter by chapter. The lead to me feels like you're just clearing your throat. But I'll tell you, at the bottom of page 2, when we're located in time and space, it totally takes off. I might consider losing those couple pages, and then I'll fight back. And then I'll say, I think I could do it better. I will. And I'll say, I hear what you say. I think I can do it better. And then I'll have it done by the next day, and it will be better. And we keep compromising. And sometimes I just do what you say, and sometimes I fight back. And then you go chapter by chapter. This is, if people want to be writers when they grow up, if you can find an editor, the miracle is that somebody is going to help you get burnish your book. And work with it. It's like when I give it to you, it's still not, it's not wet clay, but it's really still workable clay. You know, we can pinch and shove, we can take stuff out, we can take the sculptor's knife and carve away some of the bottom, and you know, and get the art, what's that thing in the middle, the armature or something like that in the middle of a clay sculpture. But anyway, it's this, you know, if you'll make sure that that solid wire frame inside the sculpture is solid, then we can kind of work and make deals on the rest of the sculpture, and then we work on it, you know, and then it's pretty hard, then it's hardening, and then we have to send it to the copy editor, and then the copy editor says, like, she's so brilliant, her name is Anna. She's been my editor, I think, every time with you, hasn't she?
She has, yes.
What's her last name?
Jardine.
What's her last name?
Anna Jardine.
Jardine, yeah. She's just brilliant, but she is such a fuss budget. And I would just let so much of this stuff go by. And she'll say, well, actually, that didn't happen that way. Or that no one ever, who you say said that never actually said that. That was, in fact, like Eckhart Tolle. It wasn't Mozart. And then, but I'll remember my favorite things are when I'll paraphrase, which I think Jesus might have said in some circumstance. And she'll say, I really don't think Jesus talked that way. And I'll say, Anna, I'm paraphrasing. And then she'll back down. But so I mean, she's, you know, she just saves the both of us every time by going through. And so if you get to be a writer, you have these people, it's like a pit crew. They help you get rid of the stuff that is show-offy or not true, or that is you trying to sound more erudite or more lackadaisical, more ironic than you really are. And they'll say, you know, this does, and then you do another draft, you do another draft, and then they do a final draft with you, and then you have a copy editor, and people, and before you get there, before you maybe get your editor, you can create this in your own life. You find somebody, like I have two people, one of them is Neil, I can show my work to before I'd even show it to you. And they do what you will do eventually is they read it and they say, I don't know. It's usually for me, I bet it's true for you too. The first page and a half is sort of, you know, lurching and flailing my way into the story. And they'll go through, and anyone can do this. If you're a writer, if you're writing, you post it on somewhere on your social media. Does anybody want to be my writing partner? I used to be really good. I want to try again. And then you meet with somebody every 2 weeks and you have to have 10 new pages written, and they will go over it for you. So that, you know, it's not a very beautiful and precise and you know, path of filigree. It's herky jerky, and some days are really hard, and I lose confidence. I don't know if you ever do. And then, but we just never give up, and then we will hear each other. And you know, in recovery, we say take what you like and leave the rest. And I'll take what you said, and I'll either agree with you or I'll make what I've done better.
That's exactly right. My job, I see at any rate, is to help you write the best book you can, and be supportive, and then get out of your way. Do you have a passage that you want to read?
I've been reading this first page and a half just because it really sets the book in time and space. So maybe, yeah.
Read that, and then there's some questions that I want to, from the listeners, that I want to share.
Okay. Here we are, older, scared, numb on some days, enraged on others, with even less trust than we had a year ago. The devastating pandemic and the federal government's confused and deadly response was simply the final straw to a few years of crushing developments. A UN report on climate catastrophe was published months before my wedding in 2019. The report of the extinction of 1 million species 3 weeks after. Major buzzkill. Our poor country has been torn asunder. I await the reign of frogs. And I've gotten so much less young. I got Medicare 3 days before I got hitched, which sounds like something an old person might do, which does not describe adorably ageless me. I mostly love being in the third of my life, as it is the easiest that life has ever been, except for, well, the bodily aspects, and the dither and fogginess. And I wouldn't go back a year, well, maybe back 2 years before the two UN reports, which have changed everything. At our wedding were all the people we love most in the world, gathered in a redwood grove to celebrate the miracle that Neil and I had found each other and fallen in love and toughed out some conflicts. We celebrated and overate, while outside the sacred circle, our nation and the world seemed to have reached the point of no return. So we danced. That was glorious, and I hate to be a downer, but now what? Where on earth do we start to get our world and joy and hope and our faith in life itself back? So that was really framing, and I set out to frame the book in the first couple pages to say, here is the problem, and where do we start? And here are what I think some of the answers. And the whole book is response to that question of where do we start?
And that, I think, lays it out really well, because you have the courage and you also have the hope. But let me I want to ask some questions that we had some from listeners. Margot asks you, what brings you joy every day?
Being outside. I mean, I'm such a nature bug, and I am so healed and reawakened every day by just stepping outside. You know, I said in Help, Thanks, Wow, that wow is the praise prayer, and you don't step outside and look up and go, well, that's a medium full moon tonight, or those daffodils are, you know, they're fine. You look outside and you go, oh, I love daffodils. They're so silly with their silly clown frills on and their huge noses. And I might even say hello to them because they've made me smile. I get outside and every single day, even I love the rain. Um, you know, one of the acronyms for God is the great outdoors, and I really feel I find a lot of solace in nature, and you know, I love that we have a kind of a compound here with my husband and then his daughter in the back of the house, a guest room, and then Sam and his son in this barn a couple 100 feet away, and Sam's girlfriend. And so there's just a lot of people here. Some days go better than others, and some days are just too long. But almost all the time, each of them individually brings me joy because they're really so loving. They're so patient with me, and they're really so sweet and kind. And we all, because of COVID college, we've all gotten more thoughtful. So if we're out getting something, say if Neil and I are getting something for dinner, we'll think, oh, what would Marina love? Well, Marina loves cheesecake. What would Jax love? Jax loves pears, especially Asian pears. And we might go out of our way if Safeway doesn't have them. We'll go over to Woodland Market, which is 15 minutes away. And then, you know, to bring something home that will bring joy to them actually is what brings joy to us. If you want to have loving feelings, you do loving things. So,
would you say family is your superpower?
No. I think my superpower. Well, this won't go with this question, but I do think my superpower is that I'm good with kids, and that I'm a good Sunday school teacher, and I'm good with Jax. And I was good enough with Sam, although of course he remembers it differently than I do. He was wrong. Well, who are you going to believe? 5-year-old? And my superpower is that I'm really good with kids. And because I'm around kids so much and they trust me, they get that great energy all over me, you know. And of course, you must become as little children. And that to me means curious and attentive. And then little kids, you know, the last 2 books ago, the book on mercy, the original title was The Open Drawer, because I was coming from a belief that when we were little, we came here as very, very generous, kind of ridiculously goofy, generous kids. I mean, some kids are just little beasts, and there's no getting around that. But mostly we were really generous, and our parents sent us to school with stuff they didn't want us to share, like lunch. in first grade, and we gave it away to someone who didn't have a lunch, or who hated their lunch and threw it away, or who'd left it at the bus stop. And I thought when we as collaborators were working on the Mercy book, the idea was that we could go back into that drawer and open it and get that stuff out that little kids come with, the generosity and the curiosity. And so that seems to be my superpower. Um, what would you say your superpower is, Jake? I'm really curious. You're a great
Wonderful.
editor, but
Well, you're nice to say
yeah.
that. Thank you. Let me think about that a minute, because I actually have a question I want to ask you, because you made me think of this. If What's the book that you wished you had written?
Oh, I loved two Barbara Kingsolver novels so much, but I'll only think of Poisonwood Bible, which just blew me away. And I loved Mosquito Coast, same theme.
Mhm.
And then, do you remember the name of the Poisonwood of the Barbara Kingsolver novel that takes place in Mexico City with Diego Rivera and poor Tolstoy Trotsky running around trying to not get assassinated, and Frida Kahlo. It is a beautiful book. What a beautiful! I'm reading a book right now. It sort of makes me want to write a novel again, but I love well written thrillers, often English, and I'm reading this book by Elizabeth Brundage called um, it all. Also, I have to look it up. Everything ceases to appear, and it is a literary book of the highest rank, but it's also a page turner. And that, to me, I'm reading it. I'm being really inspired to try that myself, and at the same time, I'm completely bitter and jealous that I didn't write it.
No
I'm
doubt there's some
enraged.
long German word that describes that appreciation and hatred
Yes.
simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what is the part of the writing process that you like least?
I hate publication, as you know. I just hate publication. And my students, I've probably had like 10,000 students over the years, and every single one of them comes to me because they want to be published. Because to be published means that like the outside world will validate their parking ticket, and then they'll have self-respect, self-love, and everybody who's ever harmed them will feel bad about that and come crawling back. And I tell them it doesn't happen out there. It's an inside job. That self-respect and that feeling of fulfillment and daily fulfillment, doing something really hard, writing a book and not giving up on it. But publication is very hard, and this is the least safe, the least amount of well-being I ever feel is on book tour, even whether it's in person or on a Zoom. But the hardest part, God, is getting that first draft written. A working first draft is well, you've been there. It's torture because for me, and I'm sure you're fine and you don't need any therapeutic help, but every aspect of my mental illness is rolved by the process of putting together a first draft. I have zero self esteem. I have this raging ego. Have Neil's super ego from Shapes of Truth. I have the governess named Dread from Dusk, Night, Dawn. I am bored with myself. Oh, that's such a bad feeling. It feels like you're pulling teeth. And by about page 30, I'm trying to figure out what the critics are going to say about it or whether they're going to ignore me. And every single thing in me that's kind of uncooked unwellness is there for the first draft. Not every day, but a first draft is going to take me of a novel is going to take me 2.5 2 years, and of these spiritual pieces we've done, they're close to a year. As soon as I've got you wrapped around my little finger again, and I'm not alone anymore, then God, a second draft is heaven. Like working with you, to have a partner. And when I was a tennis star when I was a kid till I was 16, and I was okay at singles when I was younger, and then I was always good at doubles because you have a partner. And the partner, if you miss the ball, says, it's okay. Let's just, start over. And the partner says, you know what you're doing? I just saw what you're doing on your toss. You're tossing it too high. And you go, oh, right. And that's basically what you say as an editor with my work. You say, I think I see what you're doing with your toss. And then I can correct. So a second draft with you is really heaven for me. And then the third draft is even trippier because it's like being a Swiss watchmaker. Between you and me and Anna Jardine, we're going through it like tiny parts of a watch and we're getting it just right. And we go back and forth and I'll text you. I don't even know where you might be when I text you. This is an emergency, Jake. There's this sentence on page 87 and I cannot get it right. I can't quite tell what I'm trying to say. Can you? And then you'll write back over and over again three choices of what you think I'm trying to say and how I can say it better. And so that part, that final draft is, oh my God, that's what I'm in it for.
That's what I mean. I can vouch for the fact that literally the email with your draft has not yet showed up in my Outlook, and you're calling me to say, why haven't I heard from you about your thoughts on my
I
first
know.
draft?
I know.
But
We're
that's
not
okay.
friends anymore.
It's okay. I have
That's
some
what
other
I
questions.
say.
I have some other questions.
Yeah.
Wendy wants to know, this is actually a good question for you, I think. How do you handle news and social media? Should we limit or avoid them to restore hope?
That's a great question. I mean, the whole book addresses that because the weird truths underneath every single thing I've written, single thing I think, is that whatever you need to do to stay afloat and to stay safe is okay. So just last night, there was a terrible massacre in Boulder, and last week a slaughter of Asian women, mostly in the massage parlors. And I always say to people, if you can't turn the TV on, that's okay. And if you can't turn it off, that's okay. And whatever you need to do, I mean, the book we did, Stitches, I started writing 3 days after the shootings at Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
Because I was going to be teaching Sunday school 3 days later. And I thought, I always tell my kids, you're safe and you're chosen and you're loved as is. That's the weird message of God. You're safe and chosen and loved as is. And I thought, how can I keep a straight face on Sunday and tell them they're safe when 20 of their colleagues, little children, 6 and 7-year-olds, were killed? And so I started writing stories because Barry Lopez says sometimes you need a story more than you need food. And so, and I remember writing a Facebook that day, even that was the very beginning of Stitches. And what I said was, whatever you need to do to bear this, because it was an unbearable that massacre. I'll never be over that. What happened? And oh my God. Uh, and what I said and what I believe is whatever you do to get through this, do that. And whatever somebody else thinks you should do, ignore that. Thank them for sharing. Watch TV or turn it off or go to bed and sleep until Monday. It'll be a little bit better tomorrow. You won't be quite as acute. So for the 4 years of our former president, I did not ever turn off the TV because, I mean, we wake up early and we turn the TV on to see what was the latest bizarre or tragic event that was unfolding in the American world. And then we kind of watch all day, and that would be my main writing bribe. Like, you can go turn MSNBC on if you just write for one more hour. And and I'm not doing that anymore because because there's not, except for these 2 massacres, there hasn't been like breaking news that I have to stay on top of. So I do watch, and it's so amazing to leave your telecommunications empire behind you when you go outside, to leave everything, your phone, access to anything, and just walk and just be and just listen to the natural world and the bird song and your neighbors instead of the news. But I can't answer it for anybody else. But I always say, however you can get through this heartbreak or this fever dream, do that.
Mhm. Do you find that you get bored ever?
I very rarely get bored because Neil tells me that on our second date, when he was talking about why I had wanted to be a writer, I said it was because all I wanted to do was to keep reading. All I wanted to do was to be a reader when I grew up. And the way to do that was to be a writer. And so, no matter what is, and I know you're exactly the same way, no matter what is happening, I've got something to read.
Yeah.
The new New Yorker just came. I want to check in at, I just, there are places I check in where I know there will be great and amazing writing. There's too many books. It's not like I don't have enough to read. In COVID, I have felt that the clear message from God with her bullhorn was lie on the couch and read. I can't go to any of the other places except for the market that I used to go to safely. So lie on the couch and read. So I get bored when I'm writing, but it's mostly not my issue. My issue is the opposite scene, which is being the opposite problem, which is being kind of overamped and overstimulated by the endless data stream pouring in. And so I need to get bored. I
Mhm.
need to do whatever tools I have to quiet myself, quiet my mind, whether I'm going to read or write that morning.
It's interesting when you mentioned writing again, because there's another question here from Lisa, who teaches college students and wants to know what your top advice for college students are who are writers to give them hope.
Uh, well, I can promise them that if they do it every day or 5 days a week, they're going to get better and better and better. They're going to get less charming and less ironic, and they're just going to become better writers. And it's like learning piano or tennis. You're just going to, if you keep with it, you're going to get really good. And people get to think what they want about your novel or the story that you read in your class, and you get to make the final decision. I would urge every writing student in America to read George Saunders' new book, um, A Pond in the Rain. Forgot the first part. You'll be like this someday, Jake. What's it called? Just read it. George Saunders' book that is the novel, the book version of the classes he teaches at Syracuse by teaching Russian short stories. But he's like a travel guide. He goes like paragraph by paragraph sometimes through these great Pushkin and Chekhov and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and he shows you, he shines a light on what they're actually doing here and how you could probably do it too. Right here we have an absence that is just radiant in this small Russian grocery store. The absence of, think about absence. You don't have to have people having witty conversation. You can have someone who's not there who should be. And so that book is what, if I'd had that book 45 years ago when I got started. Um, and then I can also tell them that the most important thing, that the thing that has helped me most was over the years and really from the very beginning to find someone I trust to be a reader for me, somebody whose work I love and respect and who I really want to help write their best book and or their best short story, their best poetry, and who I'll be honest with, who I'll say, Doug Foster, who reads my stuff for me, and sometimes I'll get a letter back and I'll say, I'm gonna love this, but right now I'm not sure you're clear on which of the two themes is central to the book. And so you go back and forth, and I didn't like that movement. I want to walk with you wherever you want us to go, but I don't want side trips, and or whatever. So if you find someone whose work you love and who you trust, to be very honest and very respectful and to mark it up, spend some real time with it and give it back. That would be the best advice I can think of.
When are you
Become
inspired?
available for that person. Go ahead.
Are you inspired by, besides nature? I'm not trying to. Are there human things that inspire you or your writing? I'm thinking, you know, movies, whatever else that happens to be.
Well, everything does, if I'm paying attention. I go to church every Sunday, and that it just is like going to the gas station for me and filling up for the week. And then I'm in recovery. I've been sober 35 years almost, and so I practice. I meet up with my recovery community and the Advent calendar of Zoom, with 30 people's little tiny faces, and I love that. I love movies really more than anything, almost as much as reading. I and thank God Neil does too. And we love these dark Scandinavian thrillers and these BBC productions, and we did before COVID, and they're very inspiring. You know how just to watch how somebody a director shot a scene that blows you away is like so inspiring to think, oh my God, it's kind of like when you take a Polaroid in the old day and I thought I was taking a picture of your face, but actually as the picture evolves, what's really interesting is the reflection on the border of the painting behind you and the gold, in the dips in the gold frame and or whatever would show up on the Polaroid. And so if you watch a movie that way and you watch how someone did it and you go, God, son of a gun, I'm really surprised. And back to curiosity, how did he do that? Well, rewind it. Reading a book, you all of a sudden realize that the author brought you from where we are here to where he left us off in that chapter. How did he do it? How did he or she get time to pass without having the pages of the calendar blow away or the hands of the clock spin? Maybe we see the old dog get white faced or like my old dog has and your old dog has. We see the passage of time. How do people in movies and in books do that magic trick? So I'm inspired whenever somebody catches me by surprise by their storytelling. That's all you and I are doing on almost any given day.
And you tell your stories, you tell them with such truth. Do you ever regret the stories you told?
Well, that's a great question. People ask always at my writing groups if how I can write about my family and real people that really exist. And I have two maybe differing opinions. One is that everything that has happened in your life belongs to you. And if people wanted you to write more warmly about them, they should have behaved better. But it being a little late for that, I never tell stories about my family or Neil or my closest friends that will embarrass them. I run everything by everybody. I've been running my stories by Sam since he was 10. I've I wrote a story about my mom years and years and years ago. I think it was in Traveling Mercies, and I had this ridiculous idea that it was really a love story about my mom, who was this impossible little English Monty Python character. And I believed that telling this story with love would be a real opening to a deeper closeness. She was getting Alzheimer's and getting really, really having a bit of a time, and she hated it. And all of her friends hated it. And her twin sister called me and said, Annie Lamott, you will never be forgiven for this. And the town newspaper hated it and wrote about me. And they published every letter that was an attack on me in this chapter, and not one single letter from the people supporting me. And then finally, my great old friend Bill Rankin, who I've written about a number of times, who was the Episcopal priest in town, very, very powerful guy, wrote to the Ark and he said, you have got to stop this. I have never met a daughter who was more devoted to her mother. And it stopped it on a dime. But I always felt like that really hurt my mom, and she was she had enough to deal with. And it's funny. I know we have to close. I think we have one or two more minutes. But um, I wrote a story when Sam was 16 and getting into drugs and alcohol and being really mean to me. I slapped him once, and it was really the worst thing in our life together. and he lied and mouthed off at me, and I just slapped him. And but later that day, because I do believe in grace as and contrition, we both ended up taking a nap in the same room, in the living room, because we had two different couches. And so something something emerged from an absolutely heartbreaking, infuriating circumstance. So I wrote about it. I showed it to Sam. I published it at Salon, and I got all these letters that said, Anne Lamott is no better than the pedophile priests. Abuse is abuse. And it went on and on and on. And Sam wrote this furious letter to David Talbot, who was the editor. And he wrote it. He said, my mother quits. Because I wrote every week for Salon. He said, my mother quits. You're her editor. You're supposed to protect her. And you haven't done that. You're running these letters. And then later, when Sam got clean and sober in this place up in Spokane, he brought the 20 people from his community to hear me. I was giving a lecture at a university there, and they were all in the front row, 20 of them. And he came backstage to the green room, and they said, read that story, you know, because it was a story about something that happened that really couldn't have, where we both transformed, you know, kind of against our will, and came out the other side, you know, with renewal. So
That's,
I think they want us to go.
and that is, I was going to say, that is the last word. So
Yeah.
thank you everyone for coming and listening to Anne Lamott
And Jake Morrissey, former child star.
and the book is Dusk, Night, Dawn.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ingram. Thank you, indie bookstores.